Hey everyone, Phil Strader, Vice President of Consumer Affairs, and today we're at SIG Sauer's World Headquarters here in Newington, New Hampshire, right behind me here. Let's go inside. So not only is Newington, New Hampshire the location of our headquarters, but it's also one of our many machining facilities where we use state-of-the-art robotics and endless quality control checks to make sure you get the best product, the highest quality, and the most precision possible. And it's throughout this entire factory that we apply that mentality. And this is where we make the P320. So let's answer some questions about the P320. Let's start with the safeties, okay? And why the gun was designed, how the gun was designed, and what we had in mind when we were building this thing. Now, when the gun was initially designed, our goal was to build a pistol that could be safely disassembled, right? And that meant not being able to disassemble the gun or take apart the gun with a magazine inserted. And the way obviously a P320 disassembles is with the takedown lever. Now with that magazine inserted, you can see that I cannot rotate that down no matter how hard I try, so I have to remove the magazine. So that was the first step. We wanted to design a pistol, you could take it apart without a magazine inserted to remove the source of ammunition. We also wanted to have a design that in case there was a round in a chamber, that you didn't have to pull the trigger to take the gun apart. So in an effort to take the gun apart, the P320 apart, you lock the slide to the rear, and that is how the gun has to be basically presented before you can rotate the takedown lever. And then the takedown lever is rotated down. So the magazine has to be removed, the slide has to be locked to the rear, and at that point the slide is simply removed off of the gun without pulling the trigger. So let's talk about other aspects of safety with the P320, namely the 5 things that have to happen before this gun will even shoot. Now, we have this video, a video that describes this in somewhat detail on our website. We also have it linked below. So if you want to see an animation of what I'm getting ready to talk to you about, you can actually click on that. So let's talk about the 5 steps that have to happen to make this gun shoot. First is the obvious one. The trigger has to be pulled to the rear. Now, when the trigger is pulled to the rear, the captive safety lever moves up, right? So the trigger moves to the rear, the trigger bar moves forward, the captive safety lever, which is locked in place for the trigger bar, has to move upwards. The upward movement of that safety lever will then move the striker safety, which is step 3, the striker safety lever, up and out of the way. That striker safety lever prevents the striker from moving forward. If it's down, the striker will not move forward. It will not hit the primer. If it's up, because of a trigger pull, it will go forward. The next step, obviously, is the sear has to move down. So as all that's happening, you get to that last part of the trigger pull, you keep pulling the trigger, the sear drops down, and since that's attached to the striker, the last step, the final step, step 5, is releasing the striker to fire the gun. And those 5 steps are absolutely necessary to make this gun shoot, and they have to happen. One cannot happen without the other, and it all starts with a trigger pull. Okay, let's break down each step. Let's get into the weeds a little bit here. Step 1, pulling the trigger. That's the most important step. That's the one that gets everything going. Now, movement of the trigger, that trigger moving to the rear, it actually moves the trigger bar forward. And in a diagram in the video, you'll be able to see the trigger is in red and the trigger bar is in blue. The trigger moves to the rear, but the trigger bar moves forward. If you've ever heard of a balanced trigger system, that's exactly what it means. One part goes back and the other part goes forward. All the other competitions, their parts all go to the rear. Trigger, trigger bar, all that. This is actually moving in opposite directions. Trigger goes back, trigger bar goes forward. That's step number 1. Let's move on to step number 2. Okay, let's talk about the captive safety lever, step number 2. This captive safety lever is unique in that it is kind of locked in place. There's a leg on the front and a leg on the back. And you can see that in the diagram. It's the red part, and the trigger bar is actually kind of wedged in between it. That means that trigger bar has to move for that captive safety lever to rotate up. And that's the only way it'll move because it's completely captured. So that takes us to step 3. All right, third step. Now you've heard me mention striker safety lever. On the website, it'll say striker safety lock. I'm talking about the same part here. It's basically the lever that keeps the striker in place and does not let it go forward. So let's recap. We've pulled the trigger. The trigger bar has gone forward. The captive safety lever has rotated up. And now we're on to step 3, and that is the striker safety lock, and it's moving up. As that captive safety lever moves up, so does the striker safety lever. Once that striker safety lever is all the way in the up position, it has freed the path for the striker to move forward. And it has to happen for that striker to move forward and hit the primed cartridge. So let's move on to the fourth step. The sear. The sear is an important part. It actually holds the striker in place on the primary notch. Now, once all of these other things have happened, the trigger bar, the trigger bar, the captive safety lever, the striker safety lock, all of these things have happened, you keep pulling the trigger to the rear, and the sear will rotate downwards. The rotating of that sear will release the striker. So that has to happen, obviously, to go to step 5, which is next. So the final step, the gun is almost there. This is where the rubber meets the road, folks. This is the striker being released and moving forward past the striker safety lock that has been moved out of the way because of the other 3 steps, and it's now moving forward to hit the primed cartridge. So again, all steps have to happen. They all have to happen in progress, and it all ends with step 5, and that's releasing the striker and the striker moving forward. So we've covered the 5 steps, but let's talk about some bonus safety material. So I mentioned in step number 4, the sear and the primary notch. That's the notch that the striker leg sits on and holds the gun ready to fire. There's also a secondary notch cut into that sear. And in the unlikely event of a catastrophic drop, let's say, or some force that would drop that primary notch out of the way and release the striker, that secondary notch will catch it. So it's an added level of rough handling safety, and that is all built into the sear. So your next question may be, well, Phil, what happens if the secondary notch doesn't catch the striker? Well, it's never happened in our testing of rough handling, but the way that it's designed is there's a 3rd level of redundant safety for this kind of thing, and that is step 3. Remember step 3? The striker safety lock. So if somehow the primary and the secondary sear notch were to miss the striker through some level of disengagement, the striker safety lock will still be down, because remember, the only way the striker safety lock can be up and out of the way is from a trigger pull. So that striker would simply run into the striker lock or the striker safety lock and prevent a discharge. And that's 3 levels of safety right there, just within the sear and the striker safety lock. Now, in the event you clicked on that video and you watched it to the end, you also notice mention of a mechanical disconnector. And this is basically a device that when the slide is out of battery, the disconnector pushes down, it pushes the trigger bar down, and it completely disengages it from all of the parts. So it basically results in a dead trigger, like you're seeing here, because this slide is out of battery, and it won't fire until the slide is completely in battery. So that wraps it all up. I hope that answers some of the questions about how the gun works, how the safeties work inside the gun, the sequence of events that have to happen to make this gun shoot, and we hope that gives you a much more clearer picture to the platform of the P320. Thanks for watching.